Hello and welcome to my podcast, Up Your Total Glow, your podcast for your body, mind and soul to support, guide and empower you to uncover the most glowing, healthiest and feel-good version of you. I am super excited that you're here because if you ask me, there's nothing that looks and feels better. In today's episode, I'm speaking with Susannah Juteau. Susannah is a registered dietitian who specializes in headaches and migraines. And this was a very powerful interview, and it felt very close to home because Susannah too had a head operation like I did, and she herself also made this journey or transformed this journey into her power to really help others who are struggling with migraines, with headaches. This episode is full of insights, and we are speaking about the difference of migraines and headaches. Susannah also talks about 5 steps how to cut down inflammation, and she speaks about the bucket theory, the migraine or headache bucket theory, which is something I really love, and I think I might adopt this bucket theory for my own coaching. So this whole episode is just filled with awesome insights, and let's jump right in. Here she is, the amazing Susannah Juteau. Enjoy. Hi, beautiful Susannah. How are you this morning?
Hello, I'm okay. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm very well, and I'm super excited to have you here. So thank you very much for making the time.
Absolutely. I love talking on this topic. I like talking to you, and we'll have a great conversation.
Oh yeah, I have no doubt. Maybe if you could give a short introduction about yourself. So who you are, what you're doing, and also maybe a quick dive into your mission.
Yes. Okay, sure. So I'm Susannah Juteau. I'm the headache nutritionist and also a registered dietitian in Canada and the States, and sometimes in other parts of the world as well. And I help anyone with a chronic headache condition or migraine condition, whether that's due to genetics or whether it's due to a significant injury that's happened. That basically we all have these headache buckets that are just everyone in the world has a headache bucket, but some people have a bucket that's much smaller than others. So all the triggers in our environment, whether that be through food, stress, poor sleep, toxins, all of that goes into this headache bucket. And those with a smaller bucket are much more challenged and much more likely to get migraine attacks or severe headaches. So I help people from the aspect of nutrition. And there's so much that we can do that's within our power for the body to heal itself. And that's where you and I are really on the same train of thought, is that we have the power within to heal, and we don't need to resort to the medical system where we really just get in this medical hamster wheel where you try a medication, it might work for a year, and then you're back to trying more medications, and kind of feeling like a lost cause, and we often feel like we're the only ones that are a tough issue. And meanwhile, everyone's really feeling like this. Like, surely there must be a root cause to all of this, or there must be something that I can work on myself. So I really help people, especially from the gut side of things, help them repair their gut. We use some functional nutrition testing to guide us, and then from there, within a few months, people are feeling much better and have full control over their headaches, or in many cases have complete reversal. So, and then I guess a little bit more about me. My undergrad is neuroscience, so I've always been very passionate about the brain. Just love anything about it. The passion started in grade 6 when I
Awesome.
did a university mini course, and we did all this fun stuff learning about the brain. And I was like, I have to go into this. So I did my undergrad in neuroscience. And at the end of it, I was like, but I don't want to be a doctor and I don't want to do research. So then I kind of took a year off. I lived in South Korea teaching English for a year and learned all kinds of really cool food cultures there. And, adding fermented food, how that really helps with the gut. And from there, discovered my passion of nutrition. And yeah, in the end, it just all came together when I had a brain surgery because I have a benign brain tumor. It's called a vestibular schwannoma, and they had to remove that. So after a 10-hour surgery, after that surgery, I wasn't able to return to work for a long time and developed these migraine attacks and had chronic daily headaches every day. So the headaches were actually much worse than the migraine for me, and just went through that whole medical system that I, help people try to stay away from now. And after 5 years of going through the system and really trying to figure things out and feeling like that lost cause and just wondering if I'd ever get my life back. And I had 2 young kids and really feeling like failure as a mom. And after 5 years of that, I was like, no, there must be some nutrition. There must be something I can take into control myself. And that's where I really dove into the nutrition research, because even though we have 4+ years of school in nutrition, migraine and headaches are not a topic of conversation. I don't remember it being covered ever once. So, and we know the medical school is the same idea. They usually only have 60 out at most 60 hours of nutrition in their whole program. So yeah, that's why people are so left in the dark, because no one really knows how to help them. So taking charge and really like diving into the research myself, and found a whole bunch of compelling approaches, applied it to myself, and I was able to completely reverse my headaches. Within 8 weeks, I was off all headache medication, and within 16 weeks, feeling like myself. And so now that's the same protocol that I follow with my clients.
Wow, that is so inspiring. I love your journey, and especially how you took control of it, how you empowered yourself. And you know that I also had a brain operation, and so I know really what this means and how debilitated you feel afterwards, and also that there is not much help from the typical medical system, unfortunately. And yeah, so I think that's absolutely beautiful. And I also do believe that, when we've gone through a journey like this ourselves, we just can help others in so much more powerful ways, because we can more relate. And obviously, yeah, we're practicing on ourselves, so we really know and understand what the others feel. So I absolutely love that.
It takes it to a whole different level, right? When you're, because say you're reading a research article on diabetes and you've never had diabetes, like you're skimming the article, it's not sinking in the same way.
Yeah.
But when you're covering a topic that you are passionate about for your own health as well,
yeah,
you see all the nuances, you're able to apply it on yourself before you help anyone else with the same protocol. And it just takes things to a whole different level. And yeah, I think for that reason, there's a deeper connection with each of my clients. And the empathy is there because we've also gone through it. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's just so much more powerful. And I know for myself that headaches and migraines is something so many people unfortunately struggle with. And like you said, like you mentioned, there is not much help out there other than swallowing a pill, or not yet. Hopefully,
Yes.
with all the work you and
Yes.
I and all the other amazing practitioners are doing, this will change. But yes, and it is very debilitating. So maybe could you differentiate a little bit between what is a headache and what is a migraine?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then I also would love to dive a little bit more into the headache pot theory, or what you called it before. You said that
The
in the
headache
beginning, and
bucket
I've
theory?
never heard about this. So this
Oh,
is
okay.
really
Yeah, no,
interesting
we
for
can
me.
definitely
Yeah.
dive into that more, because that's a really good like visual to think about.
Yeah.
Okay, so headaches and migraine attacks. So we say migraine without an S because it's more of a larger condition, and we don't know, well, I mean, in both cases, we don't know the reason behind it, but we want to differentiate headaches from migraine because migraine is it's a chronic illness. It's very all-encompassing. And whereas the average person has all experienced a headache at some point in their life. Now, that doesn't mean that headaches can't be debilitating as well. And I think that's where a lot of people are. There's a lot of advocacy work around a migraine is not a headache. But with anyone that I'm working with who does identify with headaches, a headache is not a headache either. It's not something that you can just drink water, or it's not something because you stayed up too late the night before or drank too much. That's the typical headaches that a lot of people are thinking about, is like, oh, just take an Advil, you'll feel fine. But with chronic, like debilitating headaches or migraine attacks, it's you're floored. You can't do anything. You can't work. You can't function. With migraine, there's usually some people will experience an aura before the migraine attack, so they get a little bit of a warning. A lot of people don't experience that aura and it just hits them. Usually there's a lot of other symptoms that are happening. So not extreme nausea, dizziness, just extreme brain fog where you really can't function. You have to lie down. So with migraine, it's a lot of other possibilities that go along with the migraine, and a headache is typically, sometimes it comes with those symptoms, but it goes up and down in severity. So you can have like a level 2 headache, but if you have it all the time, then that's debilitating, even though the severity of it isn't as bad as, say, a migraine attack. And then a migraine is typically one-sided as well. Not in all cases, but typically one side or the other.
Thank you for clarifying.
And it can switch too. Sometimes people will have, a migraine all the time on the left side, and then 1 month it'll switch to the right side.
I think that's very helpful. And also that you said, just because it's a headache and not a migraine, this doesn't mean that that it can be very, very strong and debilitating. And, that it's not fair to just brush it off and say, oh, just take a headache pill and what are you complaining about? So I really like that you made that clear too. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure. Because so many people come to me and they're like, I'm not sure if it's a migraine or not. And it's hard to diagnose. Like when you go to the doctor, they don't always diagnose it as a migraine. The diagnostic criteria are a little bit blurred sometimes. And even at that point, like a lot of doctors will misdiagnose. So might misdiagnose, for instance, a migraine as a sinus headache. Something like 50% of sinus headaches aren't actually sinus headaches, they're migraine.
Wow.
So there's certainly a lot of blurry lines there. And when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to like the gut-brain connection, the approach is very similar with both. So that's why I work with kind of both groups of people.
Awesome. I've got so many questions. So maybe first, can you explain a little bit more in detail this bucket migraine theory that you've been talking about? And I would also love to dive into the brain gut connection.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So the headache bucket, if it's a headache, then it's usually kind of brimming on the edge of the bucket. And with a migraine attack, then it's like all those triggers are overflowing. So often when we have a bad headache or a migraine attack, we kind of think of the last thing that might have caused it, when really it's a whole bunch of things that are causing it. So often people will think back to the last meal and say, okay, well, which food could it have been? Which food is triggering this? And yes, foods can certainly contribute, and food sensitivities can certainly contribute to that headache bucket, and it's one of the things that we can control to kind of bring down the headache bucket. It's accumulation of multiple things. So looking at anything from one angle is not that productive, because other things will happen. But some of the biggest contributors to that headache bucket is sleep. So not getting enough sleep is one of the pillars. So always aiming for 8 hours, and that's 8 hours from the moment of falling asleep to waking up. So for a lot of people, they're getting in bed just in time or going to bed really late and getting, I find for the headache population, we need 8 hours, not 7.
Right.
And so that's a huge contributor to that headache bucket. Then stress is a huge contributor. That's one that we have a harder time controlling, but finding the ways that you can control your stress, like, does meditation work for you? Does deep breathing work for you? Does yoga work for you? And to do it on a consistent basis rather than waiting for a stressful event to try to do some stress release at that point. It's really has to be like that daily amount is what's most helpful.
And do you also feel that for most people, it's really difficult to actually be aware of where they are at with their stress levels? Because like I see in my clients all the time, I can see and feel how stressed they are. They are completely tense and all over the place. And when I ask, you know, on a level from 1 to 10, how stressed do you think you are? They go like, oh, 5 to 6. And I'm thinking, no way. You know, I feel like we have so accustomed to our stressful, busy, full on lives that we really underrate or underestimate how stressed we truly are. Do you feel the same?
Absolutely. And even for myself, I find that happens
totally.
too. It's so hard to gauge.
Yeah.
And when we're surrounded by other people who are stressed, or it's just an expectation that you run from one thing to the next, that you're rushing through supper, that you're thinking about the next day, that you're looking at your schedule and feeling overwhelmed. You always have more to do at work. So all of those things, it's just like, it's baseline stress that we all already have. And then to add another stressful event. So a stressful event could even be, you know, our hormone cycle. So when we, during our period, a lot of people get very hormonal headaches, and because that's an additional stress on the body. So when your body is already in inflammatory state and already in a stressed out state, then you're adding this other stressful event on top of it. And that often causes that hormonal headache.
Wow, absolutely. Absolutely amazing how simple you could really break that down. I love that. And I love absolutely the visualization of this bucket. And I feel I'm pretty much, I mean, in different ways, because I'm not focusing on headaches and migraines usually, but this is pretty much what I do with my clients too, to really understand, you know, all the things that trigger certain symptoms or issues. And no, it's not just the last thing we ate or the last thing we did, even though of course it feels like, oh, this is the culprit.
Did something. Yeah. We're also very likely to, you know, put some guilt on ourselves. Like, oh, I did something to trigger this. Like, what was it that I did?
Yes.
When really it's our genetics that just kind of have us set up that way, or an injury. So if we take that bucket analogy a little bit further, is if we have kind of a medium-sized bucket, that might be kind of the average person, and then we think of a much smaller bucket then we've got the headache and migraine population, is that everything that contributes into that bucket just gets filled so much faster. And a lot of people will kind of joke with me like, oh, I have a bucket the size of a thimble, like anything will set me off. And then, yeah, and so often an injury can shrink that bucket, or, you know, not poor genetics, but just genetics in general. If you have migraine in your family, you're more likely to have that smaller size bucket, or a concussion can cause you to have that smaller bucket. Brain injuries will cause that smaller bucket. So there's a lot of things that kind of contribute to that overall.
But I love the idea that we then can take back our control and, you know, make this bucket bigger and bigger, even though, you know, our genetics used to be very different. And I would love to hear from you. So how do we do that?
Yes, so there's a few ways to expand that bucket and make it bigger again, or at least drain the bucket too.
Yeah.
So
yeah, great. Yeah.
So nutrition is one of those things that we can really focus on, and it's a lot more than just changing your diet to a healthy diet. So I think that's the very important first step, is for everyone to just focus on what they're eating, getting enough vegetables, getting enough fiber, like making sure the overall health is good. And then I'll talk about what we can do next from that point, but that is the first step, is to get the diet as healthy as possible. And then typically anyone that I work with has already done that step. So they're looking for, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Other things that are really important is getting daily exercise, and that exercise can look very different for everyone, but just a 15-minute walk for some people can make a really
I love
big
you.
difference.
You just speak my language. Continue. That's awesome.
And then for other people, they might need to do more or want to do more. So someone like me, I love doing sports. So that is my relief, my bucket de-stressor, but someone else might love to do a lot more meditation than I do. And that also helps empty the bucket. Getting enough sleep and stress control. Those are, of course, pillars. And just cleaning up the environment around as much as possible, like not using a lot of like chemicals, not something like dryer sheets, or there's a lot in our environment that we can kind of just clean up a little bit so that our toxin load isn't as high, because that contributes into the bucket. And then one of my favorite ways to empty the bucket is through therapeutic fasting. So regular gut rest helps empty that bucket too. So I kind of think of it as a hole in the bucket, and it's kind of draining that bucket as we fill it up just with the normal everyday behavior. And if we jump back to the nutrition part of things, so the gut-brain connection is extremely strong. So if your gut health is off, your brain health will be off. So if there's inflammation in your gut, that inflammation travels up to the brain, causes that daily headache, or can really fill up that the migraine bucket. And there's the vagus nerve ties the brain and the gut together. So I find the best visuals to think of a cable wire, like it's a thick wire of nerves that are passing between the brain and the gut. And so much is happening there. The gut is in constant communication with the brain, and all of our microbes play a huge role in the health of our brain as well, and just whether we're going to deal with a headache or not. So that's my main focus of reversing headaches, is to target that gut-brain connection and to repair the gut. Most people have some sort of inflammation there.
Yeah, so true. I can relate to that too. I have exactly the same experience. I would love to dive into both topics a little bit more, and if that's okay with you. So what does a therapeutic fasting look like to empty the bucket? And then also, what do you do to restore the gut, and which foods spur more inflammation or cause further inflammation?
Okay. So therapeutic fasting, I also like to refer to it as gut rest, because if we're constantly eating food and constantly digesting food and trying to absorb the food, then we never have that time for the gut to rest and repair its own cells. So if we're constantly just causing that inflammation, it's just going to get worse and worse with time. So everyone gets gut rest while they're sleeping, but our metabolism slows down while we're sleeping. And often people are eating right up until they're going to bed. So they're still digesting that food. And because metabolism is slowed down, instead of taking 2 hours to digest, it usually takes 4 to 6 hours to digest. So if that's happening, then it's just a cycle of you're really just constantly eating. So that's the first step. With therapeutic fasting is typically some longer fasts to give the gut rest for longer periods. But with everyone, I just recommend start with 12 hours. Just 12 hours can give the gut great rest and really cut down on the inflammation and really make a difference. And what that looks like is usually stopping eating when it gets dark out, or now it's summer months, so it gets dark out later, but stopping eating at 8 and going until 8 the next morning makes a really big difference over time for our brains.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. And I think that's such an important point. Thank you very much. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. I think it's definitely a staple, a component that everyone, it can make a difference. And it's something so simple, right? It's really that healing from within. Our bodies have that power. And then with therapeutic fasting, it's those longer fasts that are focused more on ketosis and autophagy. So autophagy is the cellular cleanup that happens in the cells when you're not digesting food, and for longer periods too. So autophagy is, I like to describe it as, so if you think of a house cleaner coming to your house, a house cleaner for 2 hours might, vacuum the floors, might do the dishes, will do kind of that surface level cleaning. But if you hire a house cleaner for 10 hours, they're going to be washing the walls, they're going to be washing the baseboards, your house will be sparkling clean. And it's the same idea with the autophagy. The longer time that you give it, and longer than 10 hours, but the longer time you give it, then it's doing that cellular cleanup in each of the cells and cleaning up the mitochondria and just getting rid of any cells that are starting to die off. The autophagy allows that process allows for those cells to be repurposed. So it's kind of like recycling the cells instead of letting them completely die, in which case they're not functional anymore. Instead, it's like reusing cell walls for where it needs to repair a different cell wall. So autophagy is very powerful.
And I don't know, when I think about these things I just, again, am blown away by our bodies, because this is just amazing, don't you think?
The power we have from within, and the more this discovery, now I've lost was it 2012? The discovery of autophagy. It's in our very recent history. Yeah. So that's why we're starting to hear of this. And this is why we didn't learn it in school. We're just scratching the surface of the power that our bodies have of healing from within. So it's really fascinating stuff that's going on. And we don't have any knowledge on the quantities. So how long do you need to fast to really engage autophagy and to maximize it? The current thought process is that it increases at hour 17 and it's maximized on day 4 of a fast. Don't recommend people just jumping into that without further knowledge or working with someone, but just an idea of where kind of the current knowledge of autophagy is, that probably hour 17 of a fast is when it's starting to increase.
Wow, that's amazing. And you recommend to your clients then just to drink, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, so water can have some electrolytes to make the fasting a little bit easier. Different teas can be great. Sometimes black coffee, it depends on the person. If it's someone who does have coffee every day, then you want to keep that coffee, otherwise that will cause a headache.
Yes.
And also, the biggest resistance I get is that you hear all over that you should be eating every 3 to 4 hours to prevent a headache. And yes, that's true if you're completely like glucose reliant and you're used to eating that way. So you want to gradually build into fasting. And when you do it gradually, it won't trigger a headache, because the key in fasting is that you're switching fuels. So rather than being 100% glucose reliant on fuel for your brain and for your organs, then you can also use ketones as fuel. So our body, again, wonderful power of our body, can make glucose. So you don't have to be eating to get glucose in your body. So our liver produces de novo glucose. It's called de novo gluconeogenesis, where it produces the glucose. And then we've also got ketones to fuel the body as well. And that comes from our fat cells. And that especially the brain loves, because it crosses the blood-brain barrier really easily. And especially in something like a migraine attack, where one of the current theories is that glucose is not entering into the neurons properly, and is not just in the cells all over the body, is not entering it well. And so it causes this attack. And until we rest and kind of de-stress and sleep it off and stuff, that then the glucose can start going back into the cells. But when your body has the power to use ketones instead, the attacks are much less frequent, much less severe, and in many cases can even reverse the attacks completely.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The power within.
Blown away. Absolutely. Okay. So thank you very much for clarifying that. And let's dive into how to repair the gut health and which foods are more inflammatory than others. Which would you try to avoid?
Okay. So definitely focusing on, I love to focus on what are the foods we can add in, because then we kind of crowd out some of the foods that we are less powerful. So getting, as you say, all those inflammatory foods are so, anti-inflammatory foods are so powerful for gut health. So anything that's colorful, you can think of as anti-inflammatory. So
like Smarties.
All the fruits and vegetables.
No,
but
just joking.
What'd you say?
I said like Smarties, which is, no, I was just teasing you, because that's what my clients say to me when I say, oh, the colors of the rainbow. I'm like, Smarties. No.
Right. It's like, no, that's not what I do. So lots of fruits and vegetables and more. We can always have more. So I like to suggest that people really think of half of their plate as vegetables. So so their lunch and their dinner meal, really thinking, okay, what half my plate of vegetables, and ideally at least 2 different colors there. So that kind of gives that good visual where you can look at, other people's plates and like, oh, your plate's so colorful, and it just adds so much beauty to food, and we appreciate our meals so much more when they're more colorful as well.
And when we appreciate the food more, we have better digestibility. So then,
and we take more time to eat, right?
Exactly.
We take more time to chew, and we get those enzymes working better. Because the reality is it often takes more time to prepare, but then you're more likely to sit down and to eat. And there's lots of ways to make that preparation faster, like just using frozen broccoli, totally fine, or using some frozen.
And well, you might take more time, but since you are living longer when you live like that, it totally makes sense, and it will work itself out in the end, because you've got, I don't know, maybe 10 years more up your sleeve. So it's totally worth it, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think the biggest key there is like 10 years longer, but healthy. It's a healthy 10 years longer. It's not 10 years longer of chronic illness where you're just kind of waiting. You're extending your health span.
Yes, exactly. That's so well said. Yeah.
That's the important part. So
agreed.
So lots of colorful fruits and vegetables, especially things like berries that have that extra like bright color to them. And, there's a lot more antioxidant power in there. And then wild fish. So wild salmon has great fats for the brain. Having fatty fish at least twice a week makes a huge difference in cutting down inflammation. increasing just fiber in general. So fiber through whole grains and fiber, anything that's processed, you've lost a lot of the fiber. So whole grains, dark chocolate has a lot of fiber in it. A lot of people don't think of dark chocolate. Beans, all of these things can really help repair the gut. And I also follow a gut repair protocol that's where we do a gut test, and we're looking at all of the different the microbiome, and if anyone has a parasite, then we're clearing up that parasite so that we can heal the gut, and then looking at all of the different types of bacteria and having a real action plan to target the bacteria that we want to increase and those that we want to decrease. And from that gut test, you get a sense of what is your gut permeability like, what is the inflammation level of your gut. So it's measuring a lot of different I've lost my words. Different biomarkers. There we go. Yeah. Different biomarkers in the gut to have a very set action plan, because it's hard. I think for a lot of it, it's hard to just say like eat more anti-inflammatory foods or eat more fiber. In a lot of cases, it's very helpful to break that down even further.
Yes.
Like, cruciferous vegetables. In your case, you need a lot more cruciferous vegetables. How can we include more of these? How can we get or something like apple pectin can be really healing to the gut. But when you see these results, then you can really target certain issues and say, oh, okay, we really need a lot more of more apples in your diet, or we need more beans, or in a lot of cases for anyone dealing with severe headaches, a lot of people have a lot of gut issues at the same time. They have the IBS and have cut out a lot of foods that can actually help heal the gut. So it's a protocol where you might initially cut some foods, and then it's all about reintroducing those foods and making sure that fiber intake can increase rather than staying limited is really important. Because there's a lot of like elimination diets out there for headaches. So there's heal your headache, there's lots of different ones that people end up eliminating a ton of foods, but those protocols are actually much more effective when you're reintroducing those foods.
Absolutely. And I myself have met quite a few clients who have been on very restricted diets and never have, I don't know, reintroduced foods. And, you know, I think this in itself is, is destructive, is not helpful, because yes, okay, maybe there are less symptoms now. Sometimes there are less symptoms, sometimes there are not. But you know, it doesn't often it doesn't increase the quality of life.
Absolutely.
And also there's not enough variety. And then I find these clients often lack vitality and are very fatigued. So I think it's really important, like you said, to make sure, you know, this is temporary. And then we have to see, okay, how can we fill more in now? How can we add instead of just taking away? I love that. And I've got a very personal question, because you mentioned wild caught fish like salmon, the fatty fish, which I know is an amazing food, but the toxin levels, the toxicity of heavy metals is rising. So what's your take on that, and how do you solve this? Because I do have often clients who, have quite high toxic levels. I imagine that your fish in Canada is better than ours in Europe, but still I would like to know your take on it.
It's such a hard topic, right? Because we know the benefits of fish, but then our fish is becoming more and more polluted.
And
I don't have a good answer for you. I'm currently still like kind of looking at the research and seeing that when people add in those two sources of fish a week, that there's so much improvement. So I think our fish levels, like you're weighing the pros and cons of the toxin level and versus the benefits of the fish. To me, I'm still erring on the side of the benefits of fish are more powerful, and to really control our toxins like in other places as much as possible. But I don't have a lot of knowledge, say, about the mercury levels. Do you do those toxin tests? Have you done some of those?
I don't. Yeah, I let them send in. Yeah, so
Okay.
I do find that very shocking. For most clients, toxin levels are very high. So what are your thoughts on algae oil? This is sort of what I'm trying to do when toxin levels are very high. But yeah, I don't know either. I don't know the answer. I'm just
I know it's one of those
trying.
areas that I'm just really not sure about. And
Yeah.
I think anything that we can do to help bring down the toxin levels so that we can still consume fish, I think that's what we have in our power right now. But it is quite depressing, especially
and have you
when you
experiences
see all
with
these stats.
have you experiences with algae oil? Have you used that?
It's one of the approaches that we use, especially when we see someone's omega-3 levels are really low, that I would use that. But I haven't experienced it from the point of view from like bringing down toxin levels. So I haven't done those tests on clients. Occasionally I might have a client who comes to me who's done the test, which I find is very like powerful information that we can use. So yeah, it's definitely an area that I'm also curious to learn more about.
And what, in your experience, are the 5 top foods that actually do trigger migraines?
Okay, so definitely different for everyone. And actually a good comment here is that if someone is finding that they do have a lot of food sensitivities tend to increase with time rather than decrease with time. So each year people get more and more frustrated because like, oh, now I can't eat this, now I can't eat this. And then that restriction list just gets bigger and bigger. And that's because you need to address the gut health side of things, because when you repair the gut, then those food sensitivities are no longer problematic. So what's happening with food sensitivities is that food is getting in between the tight junctions of the gut lining and causing inflammation there. And then that inflammation causes more inflammation, makes the leaky gut worse and worse, and that inflammation travels throughout the body. And so food sensitivities lead to more food sensitivities. So the underlying cause, like food sensitivities are not the root cause of headaches, even though we often hear that. So the underlying of that is that we need to approach the gut health. And so the 5 foods that are most problematic. So hard to narrow down the top 5. I used to say these are the top 5, and now I don't believe that anymore.
Okay, great.
So I
can relate to that too. Yeah.
I used to do food sensitivity testing on people. It's called the Mediator release test. It's an amazing test for determining which foods are causing inflammation for the individual. And everyone's tests were so different that it's really hard to say these are the top 5. But certainly something like gluten and dairy, anything that's more likely to be an allergen is also more likely to be a food sensitivity. So those are 2 top allergens, 2 top food sensitivities, even though allergy and food sensitivity are not the same thing at all. But they still more likely to cause inflammation in the body as a food sensitivity. So gluten, dairy, tyramine. So tyramine is in like any aged foods. So something like a green banana doesn't have any tyramine, but as it becomes more black, the tyramine builds up. Same thing with leftovers. So if you make a fresh meal, on day 3, the tyramine has built up quite a bit. So tyramine can be a real sensitivity for a lot of people. Same idea with avocado. So avocado, as it gets more and more brown, then the tyramine builds up. So tyramine would be on the top 5, I would say.
That's a good one, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people have issues with citrus, but then I find other people have no issues at all with citrus. So probably would put it on the top 5, but not necessarily a real problem. And then MSG, even though research wise, they say that MSG is not a trigger. Just in talking with people, most people will say that
I don't believe that research for me. I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah, it's maybe so much of this research is by questionnaires, right? So, or it's not necessarily placebo, and it's not necessarily, a lot of the stuff isn't actually quality research when it comes to headaches and migraines.
Exactly. And I'm wondering,
sensitivities.
I'm wondering whether maybe also these people didn't know what they were really eating, you know, whether there was MSG in or not. I don't know. Yeah. Because I don't know. MSG is something I have not met anyone who does not feel that in one way or the other in their body, even if they are not so-called allergic or have a sensitivity to it.
Yeah. And then there's also the dose response too. So a lot of MSG would affect someone, whereas like MSG is in over 40 foods that were like nutrition labels you don't have to indicate that there's MSG in it if it's in a low enough level. So something like natural flavors has MSG, or I forget the other term for it, but natural flavors on labels is something to really pay attention to. It usually means there's MSG, but it's in such a low level that that's very unlikely to bother people. But still, a lot of those food chemicals can be really bothersome to people. So, and it's very hard to stay away from if you're buying anything at the grocery store. It's everything has natural flavors in it, or things that you don't really know what's in there.
This is another reason why it's better to just stick with those whole foods, those greens, those rainbow colored foods.
Exactly.
And I'm not talking about
possible.
the Skittles and
Stay close to the garden.
Exactly. Oh, I could chat with you forever. This is so amazing, but I'm very conscious of your time. So where can one find you when they want to work with you?
So you can find me on my website at headachenutritionist.com, or on Instagram as well at headache nutritionist. Those are both good places, and you can send me a direct message on Instagram. That's a good place if you have any questions about today's conversation, or if you just liked the topic. I would love to hear from you, and just reach out and say, hey, I listened to your conversation. Thanks. So it's always nice to hear from people.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you so much. And I will, of course, put all the links and everything in the show notes.
Great.
Can you give my listeners, my audience, 3 gold nuggets as a take-home message? I know this can be really hard because there's so much you want to say and you want to give them, but just the 3 most important things that maybe would help them.
Okay, so what comes to mind right away is a healthy diet isn't necessarily a headache-free diet, so don't feel bad. But it's a journey. We're constantly learning, we're constantly building on our knowledge. And the next thing I would say is, if you are following a restrictive diet or food, or like a headache elimination diet, then to really focus on reintroducing those foods. So we want to heal the gut so we can reintroduce all of those foods, because food diversity is actually what's most important for the gut. Well, I can go into this topic much further, but just focus on diversity. Get as many plant foods as you can. So when you go to the grocery store this week, choose 2 plant foods that you haven't had in a while. So maybe you haven't had pumpkin in a while, or maybe you haven't had okra. So, or take 2 things that you haven't had and cook those this week, and just do that every time you go to the grocery store. Choose something that you haven't had in a while or have never had. And each time you're introducing your gut to a new microbiome. So each plant has a different microbiome. So you want to expose yourself to as much variety as possible. And that's what really helps heal the gut. So those are, well, that's probably 3, but
it was 2. You've got 1 more.
Okay, that's 2. So let's see. Last of all is, I would say don't go at it alone, but
beautiful. I think this is a really important one.
Yeah, we all can use support, and
Yeah.
we all have knowledge in different areas,
Yeah.
and it's yeah, just don't go at it alone, because it can feel very lonely
And
as it is.
overwhelming, I think,
Totally. Mhm.
So I do think there's so much speaks for it if you've got someone who really knows what they do, take you by the hand, and also is your personal cheerleader. So I totally, totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you so much. It has been
Yeah.
so wonderful. Is there anything I missed out on that you would still like to mention?
Well, I think we covered some of the bases. I think we can certainly go into a deep dive maybe in the future conversation.
Definitely. You have to
But
come again.
yeah, there's so much nutrition wise that can really help. Like the micronutrients would be a whole other conversation of making
Yeah.
sure that those micronutrients, that's another reason why a healthy diet isn't necessarily a headache-free diet, because if you're not absorbing those nutrients, you can have the most amazing diet. And if it's not getting into your cells, then you still feel lethargic, you still have IBS, you still feel awful. So yeah, but that's another thing for people to consider.
Cool. We have to have another time. I love
There
it.
we go.
Totally. I want to thank you for your time, and I absolutely love what you do. I love
You
that
too.
you really, made something that was very challenging for you your strength now, and that you empower others with that. I think that's so empowering, so beautiful, so encouraging to see. And yeah, I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart, and keep
Yeah.
glowing, keep doing what you do.
You
You are
too. You too. You're
amazing.
amazing as well. And to have this platform for people to, meet different professionals and get a whole bunch of tools that they can apply to their life, and just that focus of like, we have the power to heal from within is so important. So
Mm.
thank you as well.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. And if you loved it, then I would be super grateful if you supported me on my mission to make our planet a healthier, happier place, one person, one podcast at a time. And you can do so by liking, by subscribing, by reviewing, and even sharing my podcast. I know that you were born to live your best life, to feel absolutely wonderful in your amazing body, in your brilliant mind, and in your boundless soul. So what are you waiting for? Make sure you do. I'm your biggest cheerleader. I believe in you. Keep glowing. Much love. If you would like to book your personal 30-minute free discovery session with me for more empowerment, guidance, and support, then please find the link for this in my show notes.